Beneath the burning sun of ancient Persia, massive earthen domes concealed something that should have been impossible: ice surviving through the hottest days of summer, with no electricity, no engines, and no modern refrigeration. Persian builders learned to capture the cold of winter and preserve it for months beneath the desert. How did these mysterious ice houses actually work, and who controlled the precious cold inside them? Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy uncovering the forgotten technologies of the ancient world. The sun is already high above the Iranian plateau when the first traveller reaches the edge of the settlement, and by then the ground seems to breathe heat. Dust lifts from the road in pale sheets. Mud brick walls glow almost white. The air above the roofs trembles, and every exposed stone feels as though it has been holding fire since dawn. There are no clouds, no trees large enough to break the horizon, and no river close enough to offer relief. Yet somewhere beyond the clustered houses, behind a long wall and beneath a vast earthen dome, winter is waiting. Inside that dark chamber lies ice. Not a handful of snow carried down that morning from a mountain, not a brief luxury that will vanish before noon, but blocks of cold preserved through the hottest months of the year. The ice has survived while fields hardened, wells sank lower, and the summer sun pressed down with the full weight of the desert. It waits below ground in a place known as a Yakhchal, a Persian ice house, one of the most striking examples of a civilization learning not merely to endure climate, but to manipulate it with patience, geometry, earth, and time. The contrast is so sharp that it can seem almost impossible. Summer temperatures across much of the Iranian interior can rise high enough to empty streets at midday and make ordinary labor dangerous. Winter, however, tells another story. Nights can turn bitterly cold. In many regions, the same landscape that shimmers under brutal summer heat can freeze under clear winter skies. Ancient and pre-modern Persian communities learned to treat those two seasons not as separate hardships, but as parts of a single system. Winter cold could be captured, summer heat could be delayed. The landscape itself could become a machine, if people understood when to use shade, when to open a surface to the night sky, when to bury storage deep in the earth, and when to seal it from the outside world. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The word Yakhchal is commonly translated as ice pit, but that plain meaning barely suggests the strange presence of the structures themselves. Some rise from the desert like enormous clay beehives, their conical domes tapering toward the sky. Others are less dramatic from a distance, hidden behind massive walls or built partly underground. Their surfaces are rough and sun-baked, as though shaped by erosion rather than human hands. But every curve, thickness, shadow, and opening has a purpose. The builders are not trying to defeat the desert in a single moment. They are trying to slow it down. That distinction matters. A Yakhchal is not a refrigerator in the modern sense. It does not create continuous mechanical cold, and it does not make summer behave like winter. It works by gathering the cold of the coldest nights, concentrating it, and protecting the result from the months that follow. It is less a machine than a carefully arranged conversation between architecture and climate. Earth resists rapid temperature change. Thick walls absorb heat slowly. Deep pits remain cooler than exposed ground. Dry air allows evaporation. Clear skies permit stored warmth to radiate away after sunset. A shaded surface may freeze even when the wider landscape seems only marginally cold enough. None of these effects alone explains the survival of summer ice. Together, they create an environment in which cold can linger beyond its natural season. What survives in the record suggests that the technology was neither a single invention made at one moment, nor a uniform design copied without change across Persia. Ice storage has a long history in Western and Central Asia, and communities likely experimented for centuries with snow pits, underground chambers, shaded basins, and insulated enclosures. The great domed Yakhchals that still attract attention today represent mature forms of this tradition. But the path toward them is harder to trace. Mud brick architecture erodes. Working structures are repaired, enlarged, or rebuilt. Written descriptions are uneven. Scholars still debate the precise dating of some surviving examples and the extent to which particular features belong to ancient, medieval, or more recent phases of use. The evidence remains incomplete, but the underlying practice is clear. People in Iran learned to preserve winter cold on a scale large enough to shape daily life. That daily life is easy to underestimate when staring at the monumentality of the dome. Ice was not simply an exotic curiosity placed before a ruler. It could cool drinking water, thicken sweet syrups, preserve certain foods for limited periods, reduce fever, soothe pain, and offer relief during the most punishing heat. In towns where wealthy patrons funded large ice houses, the stored cold could become part of an urban economy. Workers entered the chamber in controlled periods, broke away quantities of ice, and carried them into the bright streets where they began at once to soften. The value lay not only in having ice, but in having it at the exact season when nature no longer provided it. Imagine the sensory shock. Outside, the air is dry and scorching. Inside, the light collapses. The smell changes from dust and heated earth to damp clay and cold stone. Meltwater moves somewhere below, guided away before it can pool around the stored mass. A worker descending into the pit feels the temperature drop with every step. At the bottom, under layers of insulation and shadow, lies the accumulated labor of winter nights. That labor begins months earlier, when the desert is transformed. The same open sky that makes summer so severe allows heat to escape rapidly in winter. After sunset, the land loses warmth. Shallow water exposed under the right conditions can cool quickly, especially when dry air and clear skies work together. In some places, long walls cast deep shade over freezing pools, shielding them from the low winter sun while leaving them open to the night. Elsewhere, ice or snow is transported from colder ground and packed into storage. The details vary by region, water supply, elevation, and local tradition. No single explanation fully accounts for every Yakhchal, because not every icehouse performs exactly the same task. Some are primarily storage chambers, some form part of larger systems that help produce ice, some depend on mountain snow, others exploit cold nights more directly. Yet from the viewpoint of a summer traveller, those distinctions disappear. What matters is that winter has been made portable across time. The cold has not travelled across distance alone, it has travelled across seasons. This achievement belongs to a wider Persian tradition of environmental engineering. Across the Iranian plateau, survival has long depended on reading gradients almost invisible to an outsider: the direction of groundwater beneath gravel, the movement of air through a tower, the shade cast by a wall at a particular hour, the cooling effect of a courtyard after sunset, the slow thermal behavior of packed earth. Qanats carried water underground from uplands to settlements, reducing evaporation. Windcatchers guided moving air into buildings, Thick walls and sunken rooms softened extreme temperatures. Gardens arranged water, vegetation, and shadow into controlled microclimates. The Yakhchal belongs to this same world of measured interventions. It is spectacular in form, but its logic is consistent with a culture that repeatedly turned harsh environmental limits into systems of storage and release. The desert in this sense is not empty. It is full of forces. Heat moves, water vanishes, air rises and falls, soil absorbs warmth and gives it back. Human settlement becomes possible only when these movements are noticed and redirected. The Yakhchal does not stand outside nature as a triumph over it. It succeeds because it never stops obeying nature's rules. Modern cooling depends on energy being spent continuously. Compressors run, refrigerants circulate, electricity flows, and insulation slows the escape of manufactured cold. The Persian icehouse depends on almost the reverse. Its greatest work happens before the heat arrives. Water is placed where winter can act upon it. Ice is gathered when the night offers it freely. The chamber is filled, sealed, shaded, and left to resist change, instead of constantly producing cold. The system preserves an earlier condition for as long as possible. Of course, preservation is never perfect. Ice melts, heat penetrates, workers open doors, warm air enters. The stored mass shrinks through the season. The success of a Yakhchal is not measured by stopping time, but by losing cold slowly enough that useful ice remains when it's needed most. This is engineering shaped by acceptance rather than fantasy. The builders know that the summer will win eventually. Their task is to postpone that victory. By late afternoon, the settlement outside the dome begins to move again. Shadows lengthen, doors are open. Animals are led toward water. Somewhere in the ice house, beneath walls thick enough to outlast generations, another portion of winter is cut free and carried upward. It may cool a cup, thicken a sweet drink, lower a fever, or simply prove that the desert has not been allowed to dictate every condition of human life. The dome remains behind, silent against the fading sky. It looks primitive only until one understands what it is doing. Beneath its clay surface lies a precise answer to a difficult question. How can a society without electricity, engines, or artificial refrigerants make summer snow possible? The answer begins not with the dome itself, but with the land that made such a structure necessary. Long before anyone raises a dome to shelter ice, the larger invention is the settlement itself. Much of the Iranian plateau is not a land that gives comfort easily. It offers beauty, scale, and strategic position, but it rarely offers abundance without conditions. Mountain chains intercept moisture and cast rain shadows. Basins trap heat. Rivers are unevenly distributed and often seasonal. In some regions, springs emerge and disappear with frustrating irregularity. In others, salt flats and gravel plains remind every traveller how close survival always is to absence. A civilization growing in such a place learns very early that climate is not a background detail. It is the first architect. What makes the Iranian landscape so demanding is not simply that it is hot. Many regions of the world are hot. Persia's interior combines heat with dryness, strong sunlight, wide daily temperature swings, and deep seasonal contrasts. Summer can be punishing, but winter, especially at night, can become unexpectedly severe. The same clear sky that allows the sun to strike hard by day also allows warmth to escape rapidly after dark. This rhythm of extremes shapes everything. It shapes where people live, how they move water, what crops they trust, how they build walls, where they sleep, when they work, and eventually how they think about cold itself. In wetter lands, cooling is often taken for granted. Shade from trees, regular rainfall, and broad rivers soften the edges of the hot season. On the plateau, relief must be designed. Villages and towns are arranged to defend themselves from exposure. Streets narrow to preserve shadow. Courtyards create pockets of protected air. Exterior walls are thick, plain, and deliberate, refusing ornament where mass matters more than decoration. Rooms sink lower where possible. Openings are controlled. Mud brick, clay plaster, and packed earth do not merely reflect available materials, they are thermal strategies. Such materials absorb heat slowly, hold it, and release it gradually, reducing the violence of the day-night cycle. A house becomes not just a shelter, but a device for timing temperature. This environmental intelligence grows over centuries, not as abstract science, but as cumulative habit. Builders observe which rooms remain bearable in midsummer, and which become ovens by noon. Farmers learn which slopes lose frost first and which low areas trap cold. Water managers know that evaporation is an enemy as dangerous as drought. Every generation adds small corrections. A wall shifts direction. A cistern is sunk deeper. A roof thickens. A wind catcher rises above the skyline. Little by little, the built world becomes a record of climate knowledge. That knowledge is inseparable from water. No feature of Persian environmental history is more famous than the Qanat, the underground channel that taps groundwater from upland aquifers and carries it over long distances with a gentle slope, often for many kilometers, until it reaches farms, gardens, or urban neighborhoods. The Qanat is one of the great inventions of arid land civilization because it solves several problems at once. It brings water without constant lifting. It protects the flow from intense evaporation. It can sustain settlement where surface water is unreliable. It also reveals something essential about Persian engineering. The goal is rarely brute force. The goal is to cooperate with the land's hidden tendencies, using gravity, shade, depth, and timing instead of endless expenditure. The Yakhchal emerges from this same mentality. It is not an isolated marvel. It belongs to a family of responses that includes qanats, cisterns, wind catchers, gardens, and subterranean chambers. Each one takes a harsh condition and asks how it might be redirected rather than abolished. If the air is too hot, move it through shadow and over water. If the sun is too strong, create mass and depth. If the surface is too dry, bring water below ground. If summer destroys cold, gather cold in winter and hide it where summer struggles to find it. This way of building produces a distinctive urban and rural landscape. Seen from above, many historic settlements in Iran appear subdued in colour, almost merged with the earth around them. Yet this apparent simplicity hides careful distinctions. There are houses oriented to reduce exposure, caravanserais arranged around internal courts, mosques that provide cool refuge, bazaars whose roofs turn commerce into a shaded interior world, and gardens that seem miraculous not because they ignore the desert, but because they make its discipline visible. A Persian garden is often understood as a symbol of paradise, but it is also a technical achievement of irrigation, planting, and microclimate. Running water, trees, and enclosure create coolness that can be felt on the skin. The emotional force of such places comes partly from contrast. In arid lands, comfort is never accidental. It is built, protected, and appreciated. The social consequences of this environment are just as important as the architectural ones. Water requires management, and management requires cooperation, hierarchy, maintenance, and custom. Canals must be cleared, flows must be allocated, storage must be guarded, seasonal labor must be organized. In many communities, access to cooling and preserved food also reflects social differences. Wealthier households enjoy more private comfort. Rulers and elites can command snow, chilled drinks, and elaborate summer luxuries. Yet communal systems also matter. Public baths, neighborhood cisterns, and shared infrastructure spread the benefits of environmental knowledge more widely. The evidence remains incomplete for exactly how access to ice was distributed in every period and region, but what survives in the record suggests a mixture of private privilege and broader urban use. There is also a cultural habit formed by such surroundings' patience. In climates of abundance, people may think in short cycles. In climates of scarcity, time itself becomes a resource. Water saved in one season secures the next. Mud bricks dried correctly endure for years. Fruit is dried, grain stored, shade cultivated, and snow remembered long after it falls. The Yakhchal is ultimately an act of patience made visible. It asks people to work in winter for a pleasure or necessity that will matter months later. It turns foresight into architecture. For outsiders, Persia has often seemed a land of opposites, blazing deserts and snowy mountains, barren plains and enclosed gardens, austere settlements and refined courtly luxury. Yet these are not contradictions. They are connected conditions. The refinement is born from the austerity. Sherbet tastes sweeter because the air outside is so dry and hot. A cool room feels almost sacred because the open plain is so exposed. A block of preserved ice seems magical because everyone knows exactly how impossible it ought to be. No single explanation fully accounts for the endurance and reach of Persian civilization across such difficult terrain. Politics changed, empires rose and fell, and frontiers shifted. But one continuing strength lay in the ability to inhabit environmental extremes without surrendering to them. This was not a passive endurance. It was a disciplined reshaping of daily life around the realities of aridity. Houses, cities, agriculture, storage, and seasonal labor all became forms of climate strategy. By the time the great ice houses appear in their mature form, the intellectual groundwork has already been laid by generations of builders and water managers who understand that the desert can be negotiated, if never ignored. The Yakhchal is therefore not a strange exception in Persian history. It is one of its clearest expressions. To make summer snow possible, a civilization first has to learn how to live with thirst, glare, dust, and winter frost, and then discover that those hardships, properly arranged, can be made to serve one another. That insight did not emerge all at once. Before the great domes dominated the horizon, people were already experimenting with simpler ways of preserving cold. Before the great ice domes rise above the Persian plain, cold is already being hunted, carried, stored, and guarded. The earliest methods are simpler, less monumental, and far more difficult to trace. Snow vanishes, ice melts, pits collapse, wooden doors rot, mud walls dissolve back into the ground. Unlike stone palaces or carved inscriptions, early cooling systems often leave behind only faint evidence, and scholars still debate how far back organized ice storage can confidently be followed. Yet the practice almost certainly begins long before the surviving Yakhchals, because the desire for cold is much older than the architecture that later perfected its preservation. The most obvious source is the mountains. Iran is often imagined through its deserts, but snow-covered ranges frame much of the plateau. The Alborz rise across the north, while the Zagros stretch in a long barrier through the west and southwest. High passes can remain cold when lowland settlements are already warming. Snow gathers in shaded gullies, and ice forms along upland streams. For communities with access to these elevations, winter cold is not impossible to find. The challenge is bringing it down before it disappears. At first, this may require little more than labour, timing, and insulation. Snow can be packed into baskets, wrapped in straw or felt, loaded onto animals, and moved during the coldest hours of night. The journey must be quick. Every delay turns the cargo into water. The route matters, as does the weather, the thickness of the load, and the distance between mountain and settlement. Much is lost along the way, but enough can survive to make the effort worthwhile, especially when the destination is a palace, a wealthy household, a religious institution, or a city where preserved cold commands a high price. Such transport is not unique to Persia. Many ancient societies collect mountain snow for elite consumption, and rulers across the Mediterranean and Near East are associated with chilled drinks and stored winter ice. What distinguishes the Persian tradition is not simply the use of snow, but the gradual integration of cold storage into a wider system of arid land engineering. Mountain snow is one path. Locally frozen water is another. Underground pits, shaded hollows, and insulated chambers allow communities farther from permanent snow to preserve cold with less dependence on dangerous seasonal transport. An early ice pit may not look impressive. It can be a deep cavity lined with compacted earth, stone, or plaster, placed where shade lasts through much of the day. Snow or broken ice is packed tightly inside. Gaps are reduced because trapped warm air accelerates melting. Layers of straw, reeds, sawdust, chaff, or other dry plant material slow the movement of heat. The surface is covered, and meltwater is allowed to drain away. This final detail is essential. Water surrounding the stored ice transfers heat more efficiently and encourages further melting. A successful pit must therefore be dry, dark, and deep enough to benefit from the relative coolness of the ground. The principle is simple, but simple does not mean easy. Ice storage demands constant judgment. Pack the material too loosely and warm air remains between the blocks. Seal the chamber too tightly without drainage and meltwater gathers below. Open it too often and summer enters. Build too near the surface and heat penetrates quickly. Dig too deeply without supporting the sides and the chamber may fail. Every mistake is expensive because the product cannot be replaced once winter has passed. Royal courts likely play an important role in encouraging this experimentation. Across ancient West Asia, kings and aristocrats use rare foods and controlled environments to display authority. To serve chilled water or snow-cooled fruit during a hot season is more than refreshment. It demonstrates command over distance, labour, and nature. The ruler appears able to summon winter in summer, just as royal gardens bring flowing water and green shade into dry landscapes. Cold becomes part of political theatre. Yet the history is not preserved clearly enough to assign every early innovation to a particular king or dynasty. Popular accounts often compress centuries of development into a single ancient invention, attaching precise dates to technologies whose origins are far less certain. The evidence remains incomplete. Written references may describe snow storage without explaining the structure. Archaeological remains may resemble later ice houses but lack secure dating. What survives in the record suggests gradual adaptation rather than one dramatic moment of discovery. A lesser-known part of this history is that snow and ice are not always stored as large, clean blocks. In some systems, snow is compressed until it becomes dense and resistant to melting. In others, thin sheets of ice are broken and layered inside a pit, where their own weight slowly binds them into a larger frozen mass. Dirty outer layers can be discarded as the ice is used. Straw may separate sections or help workers remove portions without exposing the entire store. The final product is practical rather than pristine. It is not necessarily meant to float transparently in a cup. It may cool a container from the outside, chill water indirectly, or be combined with syrups and fruit preparations where perfect clarity matters less than temperature. Cold storage also develops alongside older traditions of underground food preservation. Grain pits, cellars, caves, and buried vessels already teach communities that the earth can moderate heat. A chamber below ground remains more stable than the air above it. This does not make it cold, but it reduces the speed of change. Once people understand that depth protects food from daily extremes, adapting the same logic to ice is a natural step. The major difference is scale. Grain must stay dry. Ice must remain frozen. Both demand insulation, restricted access, and careful control of moisture. Some early storage places may be natural. Caves and shaded ravines can hold snow long after exposed ground has cleared. Communities familiar with such locations need only observe what the landscape is already doing. A north-facing hollow preserves cold because it receives less direct sunlight. A deep crevice traps dense, cold air. A thick layer of earth protects buried snow. Architecture begins by copying these natural shelters, then improves them through walls, drains, roofs, and controlled entrances. Over time, the supply of cold becomes more organized. Winter labor is scheduled, carriers are hired, storage chambers are repaired before the first frost. Patrons pay for construction and protection. Ice moves from an occasional luxury toward a seasonal commodity. The transition is uneven, and in many places it remains closely tied to wealth. Still, the essential knowledge spreads cold can be gathered, compressed, insulated, and saved. The Great Yakhchal does not appear from nothing. It grows from mountain paths crossed at night, from pits lined with straw, from forgotten chambers cut into hard ground, and from generations watching where snow lingers longest in spring. Each small experiment answers part of the problem. The pit provides depth, the covering provides insulation, the drain removes meltwater, the wall creates shade, the dome encloses a larger volume while limiting exposure. Eventually, these separate ideas are brought together into a single architectural system. At that point, winter cold is no longer merely stored wherever nature happens to leave it. It is invited, produced, collected, and protected inside a landscape deliberately built for ice. The mature Yakhchal begins not with its dome, but with a plan drawn across the ground. Before a single course of mud brick rises, builders must understand the path of the sun, the direction of winter winds, the slope of the soil, the source of water, and the depth at which the earth remains cool. A successful ice house is not one building but several connected elements, each solving a different part of the problem. One surface helps water freeze, another protects it from sunlight. A deep chamber stores the result. Thick walls delay the arrival of summer heat. Drainage carries meltwater away. The entire complex works only when these parts are aligned with unusual precision. From a distance, the most visible feature is often the great conical dome. It rises from the plain like a blunt earthen tower, wide at the base and narrowing toward a small opening at the top. Its shape is dramatic, but its purpose is practical. A dome can cover a large underground space without requiring heavy timber beams, which are scarce and expensive in many arid regions. The curved form distributes weight downward through the walls, allowing local materials to enclose a deep chamber securely. It also reduces the amount of roof surface directly exposed to the high summer sun compared with a broad flat roof covering the same volume. Below the dome lies the true heart of the structure, a large storage pit, often sunk several meters into the ground. Some are circular, others more elongated, depending on local construction traditions and the arrangement of the surrounding complex. The deeper the pit, the more it benefits from the thermal stability of the earth. Surface air may swing from cold nights to scorching afternoons, but underground temperatures change far more slowly. Depth cannot create freezing conditions during summer, yet it gives the stored ice a cooler environment and shields it from direct radiation. The interior walls may slope inward as they descend, helping resist pressure from the surrounding soil. At the bottom, builders create a drain or narrow channel so that meltwater can leave the chamber. This detail is easy to miss when looking at the surviving dome, but without it the ice store would fail much more quickly. Water collecting beneath the frozen mass would absorb heat, circulate warmth, and erode the floor. Proper drainage keeps the stored ice relatively dry and reduces contact with liquid water. Above ground, the dome and lower walls are constructed from mud brick, rammed earth, clay plaster, and mixtures strengthened with local additives. Popular descriptions often refer to special mortars combining clay with sand, ash, lime, animal hair, straw, or other materials. Exact recipes differ, and no single formula applies to every surviving Yakhchal. What matters is that the envelope is thick, cohesive, and resistant to cracking. The walls near the base can be extraordinarily massive. Their thickness delays heat transfer and gives the structure enormous thermal inertia. Summer warmth enters, but it enters slowly. The builders know that every opening is a weakness. Entrances are therefore kept relatively small and may be placed on the shaded side of the building. Passageways can bend or descend, preventing direct sunlight from reaching the ice. Doors remain closed whenever workers are not entering. Some structures include separate access points or internal platforms that allow ice to be removed in stages without exposing the entire storage mass to warm air. Yet the storage chamber alone cannot always explain where the ice comes from. In many Yakhchal complexes, the dome stands beside a long, high wall running east to west. On its northern side lies a shallow pool or series of basins. During winter, the wall blocks direct sunlight from reaching the water for much of the day. The low sun moves across the southern sky, while the pool remains in prolonged shade. At night, the shallow layer of water releases heat rapidly toward the clear sky. If conditions are cold and dry enough, a thin sheet of ice forms. The geometry must be carefully judged. The wall needs sufficient height to cast a long shadow, but excessive mass requires more labor and material. The basin must be shallow enough to cool quickly, yet broad enough to produce useful quantities. Water must enter in controlled amounts, often from a nearby channel, qanat, cistern, or seasonal supply. Too much depth prevents complete freezing. Too little water produces fragile ice that may break apart before it can be gathered. At dawn, workers inspect the surface. Ice formed overnight is broken into pieces and carried into the storage chamber. Fresh water is then added to the basin for another freezing cycle. Over many nights, thin layers become a considerable store. The process is repetitive and vulnerable to weather. A warm winter can reduce production. Clouds can slow radiative cooling. Wind may help evaporation but can also bring warmer air or dust. Scholars still debate how effectively some sites produced ice locally, particularly in regions where winter temperatures remain close to freezing. The structures likely depend on a combination of methods, and some may have stored ice transported from colder places rather than creating all of it beside the dome. Inside the pit, the harvested sheets are not simply thrown into a loose pile. Workers arrange and compress them, sometimes adding water between layers so that separate fragments freeze into a more solid mass. Straw, chaff, or reeds may be used as insulation between the ice and the walls, or between sections intended for removal at different times. The final result can resemble an artificial glacier built layer by layer underground. Construction itself requires a coordinated workforce. Earth must be excavated, shaped, and carried away. Thousands of bricks are moulded and dried. The dome rises without modern scaffolding or reinforced concrete, guided by builders who understand curvature through practice. Each ring leans slightly inward until the opening closes overhead. Temporary supports may be used, but traditional earthen vaulting can also be built progressively, with bricks placed at angles that allow each course to hold the next. The finished structure is impressive precisely because its materials are ordinary. There is no metal machinery hidden inside, no moving mechanism, and no secret chamber producing cold through unknown chemistry. The Yakhchal works through arrangement. Earth is placed where earth slows heat. Water is spread where water freezes fastest. Shade falls where sunlight would do the most damage. The pit descends where temperatures are more stable. The dome covers the largest possible space with the least dependence on timber. A lesser-known strength of the design is that it tolerates imperfection. The walls do not need to prevent all heat from entering. The chamber does not need to remain below freezing everywhere. The ice does not need to survive unchanged. The builders expect losses. They compensate by creating a large mass, because a large block melts more slowly in proportion to its volume than many small pieces. Even if the outer layers soften, the interior can remain frozen. By the time winter production begins, the Yakhchal has already transformed a patch of desert into a seasonal machine. The wall gathers shadow, the basin gathers night, the pit gathers ice, the dome gathers time. Together they create something that appears impossible only when seen in summer, because the real work was completed months before, beneath a different sky. From the outside, the Yakhchal appears almost severe in its simplicity. A heavy earthen shell rises from the ground, its surface cracked by sun and age, with few openings and no decoration meant to distract the eye. Yet the plainness is deceptive. Every layer of the structure is designed around one invisible enemy, the slow movement of heat. Heat does not need a doorway. It travels through walls, floors, roofs, air, water, and human activity. It enters through sunlight striking the exterior, through warm wind passing an opening, through workers descending into the chamber, and through the surrounding soil as summer advances. The builders cannot stop these processes completely. Their success depends on making each one slower than it would otherwise be, delaying the moment when enough warmth reaches the stored ice to destroy it. The first defense is mass. At the base of many Yakhchals, the walls can be astonishingly thick, sometimes several meters across. This is not wasted material. Mud brick and compacted earth have low thermal conductivity compared with dense stone or metal, and a massive wall takes time to absorb heat on one side and release it on the other. During the day, the outer surface grows hot while the inner surface remains relatively cool. By the time part of that warmth moves inward, the sun may already have set and the exterior may begin losing heat again. This creates what modern engineers call thermal lag, though the builders require no formal term to recognize the effect. They learn it by experience. A thin wall reacts quickly to the weather. A thick wall changes slowly. In a climate where daytime and nighttime temperatures can differ sharply, slowness becomes protection. The Yakhchal does not remain cool because no heat enters. It remains cool because the heat arrives late, weakened and spread across time. Wall thickness alone, however, is not enough. The material must resist cracking. A deep crack becomes a channel through which hot air and sunlight can penetrate. Builders therefore use carefully prepared mixtures of clay, sand, straw, lime, ash, animal hair, or other local ingredients. These materials reduce shrinkage, improve cohesion, and help the plaster survive repeated heating and cooling. Popular accounts sometimes describe one universal waterproof compound used in every Persian ice house. But the surviving structures suggest regional variation. Builders rely on what is available and adjust their recipes to local soil, climate, and craft traditions. The outer coating also protects the wall from rare but destructive rain. In an arid land, heavy rainfall may be infrequent, yet when it comes, it can carve rapidly into unprotected earth. Maintenance is therefore continuous. Cracks are filled, damaged plaster is replaced, and eroded sections are rebuilt. The apparent permanence of the dome depends on regular human attention. Left alone, even the thickest wall eventually returns to mud. Inside, the shape of the chamber helps control the air. Warm air naturally rises, while colder, denser air settles lower. Because the stored ice lies deep beneath the entrance, the coldest part of the structure remains at the bottom. The high dome creates a large volume above it, allowing warmer air to collect away from the ice. A small opening near the top may permit some hot air or moisture to escape, though its exact role varies between buildings. The dome is therefore not merely a roof. It organizes the interior atmosphere vertically. The entrance presents a greater challenge. Every time the door opens, warm air enters and cold air can spill outward. Builders reduce this exchange by making access narrow, shaded, and indirect. A passage may descend gradually or turn before reaching the chamber. Some entrances face north, away from the stronger sunlight. Heavy doors or temporary seals can close the opening between periods of use. Workers may enter during cooler hours. Removing several portions at once rather than repeatedly exposing the interior throughout the day. Even the human body becomes a source of unwanted heat. A group of labourers carrying lamps and tools into the pit warms the air around them. Their movement disturbs the cold layers that have settled near the floor. For this reason, access is controlled not only to protect the valuable supply from theft, but to preserve the chamber's internal conditions. The fewer people who enter, and the less time they remain, the better the ice survives. At the base of the structure, drainage performs another quiet but essential task. As heat reaches the outer surface of the ice mass, melting is inevitable. If the resulting water remains trapped, it forms a warmer layer around the ice and accelerates further loss. Liquid water also transfers heat more effectively than still air. A drainage channel carries meltwater toward a sump, underground outlet, or absorbent ground beyond the storage area. The floor may slope slightly to ensure that water does not collect. This drainage can produce an unexpected secondary benefit. Meltwater leaving the chamber is naturally cold. Depending on the design, it may cool nearby soil or spaces before disappearing, though evidence for deliberate reuse differs from site to site. What is certain is that the builders understand that the survival of the ice depends as much on removing water as on keeping heat out. The ice itself becomes part of the insulation system. Large masses melt more slowly than scattered fragments, because less surface area is exposed in relation to the total volume. Workers therefore press pieces together, pour water into gaps during freezing weather, and build a dense body of ice that behaves almost like a single block. The outer layer absorbs the first losses, protecting the deeper core. Some stored material may be expected to melt completely so that the remainder survives. Straw, reeds, chaff, or sawdust can be packed around the ice, separating it from warmer walls and reducing air circulation. These materials contain many small pockets of trapped air, which slows heat transfer. They are cheap, renewable, and easily replaced, though they must remain reasonably dry. Wet insulation loses much of its effectiveness and can decay, so drainage and ventilation must be balanced carefully. The earthen structure also benefits from its colour and texture. Pale clay surfaces reflect more sunlight than dark stone, while rough plaster creates countless small shadows that slightly reduce direct heating. The curved dome never presents its entire surface at the same angle to the sun. One side may receive intense light while another remains shaded. As the day progresses, the heated zone moves around the structure rather than concentrating on a broad horizontal roof. No single feature explains the Yakhchal's success. The wall delays heat. The dome separates warm air from the ice. The pit uses the cooler ground. The entrance restricts exchange. The drain removes meltwater. The insulation protects the frozen mass. The scale of the ice itself reduces the speed of loss. Remove one element, and the system may still function, but less efficiently. Remove several, and summer wins much sooner. What survives in the record suggests that builders understood these effects through accumulated practice rather than formal calculation. They may not have measured thermal conductivity, radiative heat transfer, or air density in modern terms, yet their structures reveal an accurate working knowledge of all three. Their science lives in proportions, materials, orientation, and repeated maintenance. The deepest secret inside the walls is therefore no hidden substance or lost technology. It is the deliberate control of time. Heat is allowed to enter only by the slowest possible routes, while cold is gathered into the largest and most protected mass available. The Yakhchal does not create an eternal winter. It stretches a brief winter night across an entire season. Before that winter can be stored, however, water must first become ice, and in some Persian ice houses this transformation happens without mountains, machines, or temperatures that seem cold enough at first glance. Water does not need to begin the night below freezing in order to become ice by dawn. That is one of the most surprising truths behind some Persian ice-making systems, and also one of the most frequently simplified. The basin beside a Yakhchal is not a magical surface that freezes under any winter sky. It works only when several conditions align: cold air, low humidity, shallow water, prolonged shade, clear weather, and an unobstructed view of the night sky. The builders cannot command these conditions, but they can arrange the landscape so that when winter offers them, the water loses heat as quickly as possible. The process begins before sunset. Water is guided into a broad, shallow basin on the shaded side of a tall wall, usually in a thin layer rather than a deep pool. This depth is critical. A large volume of water stores too much heat and may remain liquid throughout the night. A thin layer has less heat to lose and a much greater exposed surface in relation to its volume. It responds quickly to changes in the air above it. As the sun drops, the water begins cooling, first by contact with colder air and then through several processes acting at once. The most familiar is evaporation. Even in winter, some water molecules escape from the surface into the dry atmosphere. The fastest moving molecules leave first, carrying energy with them. The remaining water becomes slightly cooler. In humid climates, the air is already crowded with moisture, and evaporation slows. Across much of the Iranian interior, winter air can be extremely dry, allowing the surface to continue losing heat. A light wind may increase this effect by carrying moist air away, although a strong wind can also bring dust, disturb the forming ice, or introduce warmer air from elsewhere. The ideal conditions are often more delicate than popular descriptions suggest. The water also loses heat through direct contact with the air. If the night temperature falls below freezing, the result is straightforward. The basin cools until ice begins forming at the surface and edges. Yet some accounts describe freezing during nights when measured air temperatures remain slightly above zero. This is possible because air temperature is not the only temperature that matters. A surface exposed to a clear sky can radiate heat away and become colder than the surrounding air. Every warm object emits infrared radiation. During the day, the ground and water receive enormous amounts of energy from the sun. At night, that source disappears, but the water continues releasing energy upward. Clouds would absorb much of that radiation and return part of it toward the surface. A clear, dry sky offers less resistance. From the basin's point of view, the upper atmosphere and outer space form an immense cold sink. The water can therefore lose heat to the sky faster than the nearby air replaces it. This effect, known today as radiative cooling, explains how a thin layer of water may reach freezing while the air measured a short distance above remains slightly warmer. The same process produces frost on roofs, leaves, and exposed ground during nights when the general temperature seems too mild. Ancient builders did not need instruments to detect it. They could see which surfaces frosted first, which pools froze under clear skies, and how cloud cover prevented ice from forming. Their knowledge emerged from repeated observation. The freezing wall improves those natural conditions by removing daytime heat. Built along an east-west line, it casts a long shadow onto the basin placed to its north. During winter, the sun travels low across the southern sky, and the wall blocks its rays for much of the day. Without that barrier, the water and surrounding ground would absorb sunlight and begin the night carrying too much stored warmth. Shade does not freeze the water by itself. It prepares the basin so that night cooling begins from a lower temperature. The ground beneath the pool also matters. If it remains warm from the previous day, it transfers heat upward into the water. Builders may use compacted earth, plaster, or other surfaces that reduce leakage while still responding to cold conditions. The basin must be level enough to maintain a uniformly thin layer. Deeper pockets may fail to freeze while shallow areas solidify. Cracks waste water. Uneven surfaces produce fragile ice that is difficult to harvest. What looks like a simple pool is therefore a carefully maintained working surface. Water quality affects the process as well. Dissolved salts lower the freezing point, making ice more difficult to form. Muddy water may contain particles that alter freezing behavior and produce dirty, weak layers. Communities with access to Qanat water or cleaner winter flows have an advantage. Even so, the ice made for cooling does not always need to meet modern standards of clarity. If it chills sealed vessels or is placed around containers rather than consumed directly, appearance matters less than thermal usefulness. As cooling continues, ice usually forms first at the surface. A thin, crystalline skin spreads across the basin, then thickens downward if the night remains cold. Workers want a layer strong enough to lift and carry, but not so thick that it requires many nights to produce. Before sunrise, they break the sheet into manageable slabs. If the ice is left after sunlight reaches the basin, its dark surroundings may warm quickly and begin melting the fragile layer almost at once. The timing of the harvest is therefore severe. Workers rise in the coldest darkness, when fingers stiffen and the ground is hardest. They use poles, hooks, wooden tools, or simple blades to fracture the surface. The pieces are dragged from the basin and transferred toward the storage pit. New water is then released in a thin layer so the cycle can begin again the following night. Over a sequence of clear winter nights, modest sheets accumulate into a large frozen store. Scholars still debate how often local ice production succeeded in places with relatively mild winters. Some popular explanations imply that radiative cooling alone could produce vast quantities of ice under almost any desert conditions. That goes too far. Air temperature, humidity, cloud cover, wind, basin depth, and local elevation all place strict limits on the system. In colder inland towns, natural freezing would be dependable. In warmer districts, production may have been irregular. Supplemented by transported snow or ice from uplands, no single explanation fully accounts for every surviving complex. There is also uncertainty because many historic Yakhchals are studied after their water channels, basins, and surrounding walls have been damaged or altered. The dome survives because of its mass, while the shallower working parts disappear beneath roads, farms, and modern construction. A structure now described as an ice-making facility may have served mainly as storage. Another may once have included pools that no longer exist. The physical evidence must be interpreted with caution. Still, the central principle is secure. Persian builders learned to make every part of a winter night useful. The wall prevents unwanted solar gain. The basin reduces the volume that must cool. Dry air encourages evaporation. Clear skies draw heat upward. Cold winter temperatures complete the transformation. The system does not violate nature. It succeeds by exposing water to nature with unusual precision. The resulting ice may be only a few centimeters thick, brittle and clouded with bubbles, yet once broken, carried below ground, stacked, compressed, and joined with other layers, it becomes something far more durable. A single frozen sheet would disappear quickly under the summer sun. Thousands of sheets, harvested before dawn and assembled into one protected mass, can outlast the season that created them. The night therefore provides only the raw material. Turning that fragile skin of ice into a supply large enough for an entire summer requires human labour carried out while the rest of the settlement sleeps. The coldest hours arrive just before dawn, when the stars still hang above the plateau and the settlement has not yet begun to stir. In the darkness beyond the houses, workers gather beside the freezing basin with wooden poles, hooks, baskets, ropes, and thick layers of cloth wrapped around their hands. Their task must be completed quickly. The night has produced only a temporary surface, a thin sheet of ice that begins losing its advantage as soon as the eastern sky brightens. The first strike breaks the silence. A pole comes down against the frozen basin, and a long crack races across the surface. More blows follow, controlled rather than violent, dividing the sheet into slabs that can be lifted without shattering completely. The ice is rarely smooth or transparent. It may be cloudy with trapped air, roughened by dust, and thinner in some places than others. Along the edges it can be brittle, while deeper sections resist the tools. Workers learn to read these differences by touch and sound. A sharp ringing suggests firm ice. A dull response warns that water remains below. The labour is cold, wet, and repetitive. Bare skin sticks painfully to frozen surfaces. Meltwater seeps through sandals and clothing. A slab that breaks unexpectedly can cut hands or send a worker stumbling into the basin. The ice itself is heavy, especially when carried in irregular pieces, yet delay is dangerous. The long wall keeps the basin shaded for part of the morning, but the surrounding air is already beginning to warm. Every fragment left exposed becomes thinner and more difficult to handle. Teams work in sequence. Some break the surface, others slide the pieces toward the edge with poles. Carriers lift them into shallow baskets, onto wooden frames, or directly onto cloth and reed mats. From there, the ice moves toward the Yakhchal entrance, sometimes only a short distance away, sometimes across a larger complex of channels and walls. The route is kept clear because speed matters, and because a dropped slab can fracture into useless splinters that melt before they reach storage. At the entrance, the bright winter sky disappears behind thick walls. The workers descend through a narrow passage, carrying the cold deeper into the earth. Their breath may hang briefly in the air. Footsteps echo from the curved interior. At the bottom lies the growing mass assembled over previous nights. Uneven at first, but gradually becoming denser as new layers are added. The fresh slabs are not simply piled at random. Large pieces are placed tightly together, while smaller fragments fill the gaps. In sufficiently cold weather, water may be poured between the layers so that it freezes and binds them into a more continuous block. Workers stamp, press, and arrange the pieces, reducing empty spaces where warmer air could circulate. The aim is to create a frozen body that behaves less like a pile of individual slabs and more like a single artificial glacier. This process may continue for weeks, depending on the severity of winter and the amount of ice required. Each suitable night adds another layer. Some nights produce thick sheets, others produce almost nothing. Clouds can trap heat. A warm wind may prevent freezing. Dust can settle onto the basin. Water channels may fail or deliver too much flow. The workers cannot rely on a fixed schedule, only on close attention to weather and local knowledge. That uncertainty shapes the entire season. A successful winter means confidence during the following summer. A poor winter brings scarcity months before anyone feels the full heat. Those responsible for the Yakhchal must decide how long to continue production, how much labour to assign, and whether additional snow or ice should be brought from colder uplands. Scholars still debate the organisation of this workforce in different regions. Some ice houses may have belonged to wealthy patrons, charitable foundations, governors, or merchant families. Others may have served neighbourhoods or towns through arrangements that combined public use with private control. What survives in the record suggests that ice harvesting could be both skilled labour and seasonal obligation. The work requires knowledge of freezing conditions, basin depth, storage methods, and the fragile structure of newly formed ice. It also requires endurance. The labourers begin when the air is most painful, handling a material valued precisely because it is difficult to obtain. By summer, the people consuming chilled drinks may never see the winter work that made them possible. The contrast between production and consumption is striking. Ice is created in darkness, discomfort, and silence, then enjoyed months later in courtyards, markets, gardens, or shaded rooms. The person lifting a cool cup in July is connected to workers who stood ankle-deep in freezing water before sunrise in January. The Yakhchal stores not only cold, but deferred labour. Inside the chamber, layers of straw, chaff, reeds, or other plant material may be placed between the ice and the walls. Some insulation separates different sections of the store, making later removal easier. A working surface or narrow path may be maintained so that labourers can descend without climbing directly over the frozen mass. As the pit fills, access becomes more difficult. Ice must be positioned carefully to avoid unstable voids or collapses. The final layers may be covered with thick insulation before the chamber is sealed for the warm season. Openings are closed or reduced. Doors are checked. Cracks in the outer plaster are repaired. Drainage channels are cleared so that melt water can escape. Once the hottest months begin, maintenance becomes more difficult because every entry allows warm air to reach the store. The harvesting season also reveals how closely the icehouse depends on water management. The freezing basin must be replenished with controlled amounts, often from a kanat or local channel. If the supply arrives too quickly, the layer remains too deep to freeze. If it arrives too slowly, part of the basin dries before night. Water cannot be wasted, especially in an arid region where the same source may support households, fields, gardens, animals, and religious facilities. Producing ice, therefore, competes with other needs, and the decision to freeze water reflects both environmental opportunity and social priorities. A lesser-known complication is cleanliness. The basin lies open to dust, wind-blown debris, animals, and the tools of workers. Ice intended for direct consumption may require cleaner water and more careful handling than ice used to cool containers. Dirty outer surfaces can be removed, or the ice can chill food indirectly. Practices likely vary by place, period, and social status. The evidence remains incomplete. And later romantic descriptions sometimes make the process appear more refined than everyday working conditions probably were. By the end of a successful winter, the chamber holds an enormous compressed mass. The separate nights that created it are no longer visible. Thin sheets, broken edges, poured water, and thousands of human movements have merged into one body of cold beneath the dome. Above ground, spring begins to soften the landscape. The freezing pool stops producing. The long wall that once protected the basin now casts its shadow over bare earth. The workers close the chamber knowing that the difficult part is not finished. Producing and storing the ice has taken only one season. Preserving it through another will require stricter discipline. From this point onward, every opening, every crack, every careless removal, and every stream of meltwater becomes part of a slow contest against summer. By the time summer settles over the plateau, the Yakhchal has changed from a place of production into a place of defense. The freezing basin stands empty. The winter channels are dry or redirected. The long shadow wall still crosses the ground, but it no longer protects water waiting to become ice. All attention turns inward, toward the buried mass sealed beneath the dome. From now until the return of cold weather, the structure has only one purpose: lose as little as possible. The battle begins gradually. Spring warmth penetrates the outer plaster, then retreats at night. The thick earthen walls absorb these changes slowly, smoothing the daily rise and fall. Deep inside, the ice remains largely untouched, but as the weeks pass, the average temperature outside rises. Nights no longer cool the building enough to erase the heat gained during the day. Warmth begins accumulating within the walls, moving inward with relentless patience. The builders expect this. A Yakhchal is designed around loss, not perfection. Even in the best-maintained chamber, the outer surfaces of the stored mass soften first. Meltwater trickles downward and disappears through the drain. The ice shrinks almost invisibly, a few drops at a time, while the interior remains firm. The objective is not to prevent melting altogether. That would be impossible without continuous refrigeration. The objective is to keep the rate of melting slow enough that useful quantities survive until the hottest and most valuable part of the year. Scale becomes one of the strongest defences. A single small block placed in a warm room has a larger exposed surface compared with its volume and disappears quickly. A vast compacted mass behaves differently. Its outer layer absorbs most of the incoming heat while the frozen core remains protected. The larger and denser the store, the more efficiently it preserves itself. This is why the careful winter work of pressing slabs together matters months later. Every pocket of warm air left inside becomes a weakness. Every tightly frozen seam strengthens the whole. The chamber's opened only when necessary. Access may occur early in the morning or after sunset, when outside temperatures are lower. A keeper unlocks the entrance, and workers descend through the narrow passage with tools and carrying containers. They remove ice from a limited area rather than exposing the entire mass. The operation must be fast but controlled. Striking too hard can fracture more ice than required. Lingering too long allows warm air to enter and cold air to spill outward along the floor. Cold air is dense and tends to remain in the deepest part of the pit, but an open door can disturb this natural layering. As warm air enters above, colder air may flow out below, especially if the passage slopes downward. Bends, raised thresholds, heavy doors, and temporary curtains can reduce the exchange. Some chambers may be divided internally or accessed from platforms that allow workers to reach the ice without descending to the lowest level. Designs vary, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the governing principle is consistent. Every removal sacrifices a small part of the stored climate. The keeper's role is therefore as important as the builder's. Ice must be rationed according to the remaining supply, the expected length of summer, and the needs of customers or patrons. Too generous a distribution early in the season may leave nothing for the hottest weeks. Too much caution may preserve ice beyond the period when it's most useful. The keeper watches the height of the mass, the flow of meltwater, the condition of the walls, and the changing price outside. This is not simply storage. It is seasonal accounting conducted in cold darkness. The amount lost to melting likely differs greatly from one Yakhchal to another. Wall thickness, depth, orientation, maintenance, ice quality, local temperatures, and frequency of access all affect survival. Popular accounts sometimes suggest that almost all the stored ice remained intact through summer, but such claims are difficult to support across every site. Substantial loss is not evidence of failure. If enough ice remains to be sold or used months after freezing conditions have ended, the structure has already accomplished something extraordinary. The drainage channel provides one of the clearest signs of this practical acceptance. Builders do not pretend that the ice will remain untouched. They design a path for its inevitable transformation. Meltwater must leave before it pools around the base, because standing water carries heat efficiently and attacks the earthen floor. A blocked drain can ruin a season's supply. Sediment, straw, broken ice, or collapsed plaster may obstruct the outlet. So it requires inspection before summer and occasional attention during use. Water moving through the drain can also reveal hidden problems. A sudden increase may mean that warm air has entered, insulation has shifted, or a crack has opened in the structure. A slow, steady flow is expected. A strong stream is a warning. Experienced workers may learn to judge the health of the store by sound alone, listening in the dim chamber for the rhythm of drops below. Outside, maintenance continues under far less comfortable conditions. The dome's sun-facing surface may split as clay dries and contracts. Small cracks are patched before they widen. Rain, though rare, can be dangerous because it softens exposed earth and creates channels for later heat. Birds or animals may damage vents, doors warp. The shade wall erodes near its base. The Yakhchal survives not because its materials are indestructible, but because people repeatedly repair them. Dust becomes another quiet enemy. It settles on doors, fills gaps, and contaminates ice during removal. Yet dust can also have an insulating effect when mixed with straw or packed earth. The same material may protect one part of the system while threatening another. This ambiguity is typical of vernacular engineering. There are few perfect materials, only substances used according to their strengths and kept away from situations where their weaknesses become dangerous. As the hottest months arrive, demand increases precisely when the store is most vulnerable. Markets remain active in the cooler hours. Courtyards are wetted to reduce dust and temperature. Families retreat into shaded rooms. Water drawn from underground channels may already feel cool compared with the air, but ice offers something more immediate. It can transform a drink, soothe a fever, preserve a delicate food for a little longer, or provide relief to someone weakened by heat. Each block removed from the chamber begins dying the moment it reaches daylight. Workers wrap it in straw, wool, felt, or cloth, and carry it quickly through the streets. Some is delivered in large pieces. Some is chipped into smaller quantities. The journey may be short, yet loss continues all the way. Drops fall from the bundle. Corners soften. A portion purchased at the Yakhchal becomes a smaller portion by the time it reaches a distant house. This creates a geography of cold around the ice house. People living nearby receive more of what they pay for. Those farther away must accept greater melting or arrange faster transport. Wealth can overcome distance through servants, animals, and insulation. Poorer buyers may purchase only small quantities for urgent needs or special occasions. Scholars still debate how widely ordinary people use stored ice in different periods, but it is clear that access depended on more than the simple existence of a Yakhchal. Late in the season, the frozen mass may become irregular. Hollows open where sections have been cut away. Straw and debris cling to exposed surfaces. Meltwater grooves appear along the floor. The chamber that looked full and silent in spring now bears the marks of repeated use. Workers must take greater care as unstable sections can collapse, and the remaining ice may lie deeper or farther from the entrance. Eventually, the keeper faces a final calculation. The nights are beginning to lengthen, but winter remains distant. Enough ice may survive for weeks, or only days. The last blocks can command higher value because scarcity sharpens demand. Yet some may be reserved for a patron, a medical need, a religious event, or a household whose support finance the structure. The social life of the Yakhchal becomes most visible at the moment when its physical supply is nearly gone. Then, one day, the chamber holds only wet straw, fragments of dirty ice, and a shrinking core at the bottom. Summer has not been defeated. It has simply been delayed. The desert wins, as it always does, but far later than nature alone would have allowed. That delay is the true achievement. Through geometry, labour, insulation, discipline, and controlled sacrifice. Winter has survived into the season that should have erased it. The ice now leaves the darkness and enters the world of markets, gardens, kitchens, medicine, and status, where its value becomes social as much as physical. Once ice leaves the darkness of the Yakhchal, it enters a world of unequal access. The same frozen material can become a symbol of royal magnificence, a profitable urban commodity, a charitable provision, or a rare purchase carried home in a dripping bundle. Its meaning changes according to who controls the ice house, who pays for its winter labor, and who is allowed to enter the distribution system when summer reaches its height. At the upper end of society, cold has long been associated with power. A ruler able to serve chilled water, fruit, or sweetened drinks during extreme heat demonstrates more than refined taste. He demonstrates command over labor, distance, storage, and season. Snow may be carried from mountains, ice may be preserved in guarded chambers, and servants may move it through palace corridors before it melts. The luxury is temporary, which makes it more impressive. Gold can be displayed all year. Summer ice must be produced again and again through careful organization. Persian courts are often described through gardens, fountains, perfumes, fruit, textiles, and shaded pavilions. But temperature itself is part of this cultivated environment. Water channels cool the air, trees cast dense shade. Thick walls protect interior rooms. Ice intensifies the effect, turning already refreshing spaces into demonstrations of controlled abundance. A cold drink served beside flowing water in a garden presents an image of the world reordered dryness answered by irrigation, heat answered by snow, wilderness answered by design. Yet the Yakhchal cannot be understood only as a royal appliance. Many surviving ice houses stand near towns, caravan routes, markets, or agricultural settlements rather than inside palace compounds. Their scale suggests organized use beyond a single household. Some are likely funded by governors, wealthy merchants, landowners, religious endowments, or local benefactors. A patron who pays for construction gains prestige, influence, and perhaps revenue in some cases. Part of the supply may be sold commercially while another portion is reserved for public or charitable distribution. The exact arrangements differ across place and period, and the evidence remains incomplete. Ownership records do not survive for every structure. Some Yakhchals change hands repeatedly or are rebuilt under new patrons. A building that begins as a private enterprise may later serve a neighborhood. Another may be associated with a caravanserai, estate, garden, or charitable foundation. What survives in the record suggests not one universal system, but a flexible institution embedded in local economies. To operate such a structure requires far more than a builder and a winter work crew. Water rights must be secured. Basins and channels must be maintained. Ice must be harvested, stored, guarded, cut, weighed, transported, and sold. Straw and other insulation must be gathered. Doors, drains, and plaster need repair. A keeper monitors access. Labourers enter the pit. Carriers move the product into town. Vendors may break large blocks into smaller portions for customers who cannot afford more. Cold therefore creates employment. It also creates opportunities for fraud. A cellar can include too much straw, dirt, or melt water in a measured portion. A carrier may deliver less than was removed from storage and blame the summer heat. A keeper may reserve better ice for favoured customers or release supplies early when prices rise. Theft is especially tempting because the evidence disappears. a stolen block quickly becomes a puddle, leaving little behind except suspicion. Measurement presents its own difficulty. Ice changes weight continuously as it melts. A quantity weighed at the Yakhchal is lighter by the time it reaches the market. Customers may pay according to estimated weight, volume, or customary portions rather than exact modern measurement. Speed becomes part of the transaction. The buyer is not merely purchasing ice, but purchasing the time remaining before it becomes water. In a busy town, distribution probably follows the rhythms of heat. Ice is removed during the coolest hours and transported before the streets become unbearable. Wealthy houses send servants directly to the source. Merchants purchase larger quantities for drink preparation or food service. Smaller buyers wait near vendors who chip pieces from insulated bundles. The sound of metal or wooden tools striking ice in a summer market must have been instantly recognizable, announcing a product that could not remain on display for long. Distance determines value. A household close to the ice house can receive a firm block. A customer across town receives rounded edges and a trail of lost water. Transport to nearby villages requires heavier insulation and larger starting quantities. Animals may carry ice wrapped in felt, wool, straw, or skins, but every additional hour reduces the final amount. This creates an invisible boundary around each Yakhchal, a practical region within which preserved cold remains economically useful. Social rank shapes access within that boundary. Elites can obtain ice frequently and use it for pleasure. Merchants and comfortable household may buy it for guests, celebrations, or the hottest days. Craftspeople and labourers are less likely to consume it regularly, though they may encounter it in public drink stalls, charitable distributions, medical treatment, or seasonal festivals. The poorest families may know the icehouse well without often possessing its product. Its dome dominates the landscape, but the cold inside is not automatically shared equally. Even so, it would be misleading to imagine that all preserved ice remains trapped within aristocratic life. The large capacity of some Yakhchals and the existence of commercial distribution indicate broader demand. Urban populations value cold water and sweet drinks, especially where summer heat is severe. A small amount of ice can cool a larger vessel indirectly, extending its usefulness. Shared containers, market cellars, and public institutions allow the benefit to reach people who could never finance an icehouse themselves. Religious and charitable traditions may also influence distribution. Wealthy patrons across the Islamic world establish endowments supporting fountains, schools, caravansaries, hospitals, and services for travellers or the poor. An icehouse connected with such an institution can provide cold water or medical relief as an act of public generosity. Scholars still debate the precise role of charitable ice in different Persian cities, but patronage is important because major infrastructure rarely survives on occasional private purchases alone. Control over ice can therefore produce political value. A governor who ensures affordable supplies during a severe summer appears competent and generous. A merchant who funds an icehouse attaches his name to relief from heat. A neighbourhood that maintains its own store gains a degree of independence. Conversely, shortages, high prices, or restricted access can sharpen resentment. Cold may be a luxury, but during illness or extreme heat it can feel closer to necessity. The Yakhchal thus connects climate to hierarchy. Its winter labour is often performed by those who enjoy the least summer luxury. Its largest blocks may travel toward the most protected houses, yet the same system can support public markets and communal services. No single explanation fully accounts for this mixture of privilege and utility. like water itself, ice moves through channels shaped by both engineering and power. By midday, the market quiets under the heat. A vendor wraps the remaining fragments more tightly. Servants hurry toward shaded courtyards. A physician receives a small portion for a feverish patient. Somewhere behind high walls, a chilled drink is poured beside a garden pool. Elsewhere, a family shares a cup cooled with a piece no larger than a fist. All of them depend on the same winter darkness, the same buried chamber, and the same carefully rationed store. But what they do with the cold reveals the many worlds contained within a Persian city. Ice is never merely frozen water. It is medicine, hospitality, commerce, prestige, and relief, and its influence becomes most visible in the foods, drinks, and rituals it transforms. The smallest fragment of ice can transform an entire table. It does not need to be served as a glittering block or displayed before guests. A few chips wrapped around a jug, placed beneath a bowl, or crushed into a sweetened drink can alter taste, texture, temperature, and mood. In the heat of a Persian summer, that change is immediate. Warm water becomes refreshing. Fruit syrup sharpens, milk thickens. A medicine that seemed unpleasant becomes easier to swallow. Cold enters daily life not as an abstract achievement of engineering, but as a sensation on the tongue. Among the most familiar uses is the cooling of sherbet, a broad family of drinks prepared from fruit juices, herbs, flowers, sugar, honey, or other sweeteners. The word has travelled through many languages, changing its meaning along the way. But in Persian and neighbouring traditions, it belongs to a long history of flavoured drinks served in warm climates. Pomegranate, sour cherry, quince, lemon, rosewater, tamarind, and fragrant herbs can all become the foundation of a cooling beverage. Water alone relieves thirst. Sherbet offers something more ceremonial, combining sweetness, acidity, perfume, and cold. Ice may be placed directly into the drink when clean enough, but it can also cool the vessel from outside. A ceramic or metal container is set against crushed ice, stirred, and allowed to chill without mixing potentially dirty storage ice into the liquid. This indirect method makes practical sense in a world where ice has passed through open basins, straw insulation, dusty chambers, tools, and many hands. The finest ice may be reserved for direct consumption, while rougher material serves perfectly well as an external coolant. The distinction between cooling and freezing leads toward one of Persia's most celebrated foods, falude, or falude, a chilled dessert of thin starch noodles combined with sweet syrup, often scented with rosewater and sharpened with citrus or sour cherry. Its precise history is difficult to reconstruct, and popular accounts sometimes assign it impossibly ancient dates with more confidence than the evidence allows. What survives in culinary tradition, however, shows how stored ice could support textures that would otherwise be unattainable in summer. The dessert is not merely cold, it depends on controlled freezing, stirring, and the interaction between syrup and ice. Other frozen sweets may be prepared by placing a container of sweetened liquid inside a larger vessel packed with ice. Salt can be mixed with the outer ice to lower its effective melting temperature, drawing more heat from the inner mixture and allowing it to freeze more rapidly. The scientific principle is now familiar, but it could be discovered through practice long before anyone described it chemically. Ice mixed with salt melts more readily, and in doing so absorbs heat from its surroundings. A cook who notices that a salted ice bath freezes a sweet mixture more effectively has found a way to turn stored winter cold into a deliberate summer transformation. Such preparations are labor-intensive and consume valuable ice, so they're more likely to appear in wealthy households, commercial establishments, or special gatherings than at every ordinary meal. Yet the cultural influence of cold reaches beyond elite kitchens. Vendors can sell chilled syrups in markets. Families may purchase small amounts of ice for guests or festivals. A single cold dish can mark hospitality, suggesting that the host has spent money, planned carefully, and chosen to share a scarce seasonal pleasure. Ice also extends the useful life of certain foods, though it does not create anything resembling modern refrigerated storage. A Yakhchal is usually not a warehouse where meat, milk, and vegetables remain safely preserved for months. Temperatures fluctuate, cleanliness varies, and access introduces heat. Still, cold can delay spoilage for short periods. Containers of dairy products may be placed near ice. Meat intended for immediate preparation can be kept cooler during the hottest hours. Fruit may remain firm longer. The benefit is temporary but meaningful in a climate where warmth accelerates decay. Milk-based foods particularly benefit from cooling. Yogurt, whey drinks, creams, and soft cheeses are already part of regional food traditions shaped by fermentation and rapid consumption. Ice does not replace these preservation methods. It supplements them. A chilled yogurt drink becomes more refreshing. A milk preparation can be held for a little longer before souring. Butter and animal fats remain firmer in affluent kitchens. This extra margin of time allows greater variety and more elaborate service. A lesser-known use of ice involves texture rather than safety. Cooks can cool syrups rapidly to control crystallization, firm, delicate preparations, or create semi-frozen consistencies. Ice may help clarify liquids by encouraging fats or suspended material to separate. It can cool cooked foods before they are combined with other ingredients. These are small technical advantages, but together they expand what a kitchen can achieve during summer. Cold also belongs to medicine. Persian medical traditions inherit and develop ideas about balancing the body through food, environment, rest, and treatment. Physicians working within humoral systems interpret illness through qualities such as hot, cold, wet, and dry. Ice therefore carries both therapeutic promise and potential danger. It may be used to reduce the sensation of fever, soothe inflammation, numb pain, slow bleeding, or cool water for a patient suffering in extreme heat. Yet excessive cold can also be regarded as harmful, especially for certain constitutions or illnesses. Because medical theory changes across time and place, it is difficult to generalize about every prescription. The evidence remains incomplete, and surviving medical texts often reflect learned practice more clearly than ordinary household treatment. Still, cold compresses, chilled drinks, and ice applied to injured areas are plausible and documented features of pre-modern medicine in many regions. Their effectiveness varies, but the relief they provide can be immediate. A person burning with fever does not need a complete theory of infection to feel the comfort of cool cloth against the skin. Ice can also assist in surgery and dental treatment by numbing tissue, though it cannot provide deep or reliable anesthesia. Applied long enough, cold reduces sensation and swelling. It may slow local bleeding by constricting blood vessels. These effects are limited, and no responsible account should portray a Yakhchal as supporting modern surgical care. Yet in a world with few pain control options, even partial relief matters. The cold chamber itself may have medical value during severe heat. Someone weakened by fever, dehydration, or heat exhaustion could benefit from a cooler environment, although descending into a working ice pit would bring risks of slipping, contamination, and sudden temperature change. More commonly, ice is carried to the patient. Its scarcity may determine who receives it. A wealthy household can purchase repeated supplies. A poorer family may depend on charity, a local patron, or a physician with access to the ice house. Hospitality gives cold another social role. To offer chilled water to a traveller arriving from a dusty road is an act of care made more powerful by the climate. The guest understands what has been spent. Ice must be harvested months earlier, stored, guarded, cut, wrapped, and carried. A cool cup therefore contains invisible labour and foresight. It says that the visitor's comfort was worth consuming part of a finite winter reserve. This symbolism appears most clearly in gardens and reception spaces, where cold drinks accompany shade, flowing water, fruit, music, and conversation. The Yakhchal remains outside or beneath the city, rough and utilitarian, while its product enters refined surroundings. Straw-covered blocks become scented sherbet. Cloudy slabs become delicate frozen noodles. The brutal work of winter becomes summer elegance. Yet ice never loses its connection to urgency. The drink must be served before it warms. The dessert must be eaten before it softens. The medicine must reach the patient before the bundle becomes water. Every use carries an awareness of disappearance. Cold is valuable because it cannot be held indefinitely. Across Persian towns, this fleeting material creates lasting customs. It influences recipes, commercial routines, medical choices, and expectations of hospitality. It allows summer to contain brief moments of winter, not as spectacle alone, but as taste, relief, and human care. The methods behind those moments, however, are far from uniform. Beyond the great domed structures, regional communities develop different forms of ice houses, different water sources, and different ways of gathering cold from the landscape. The word Yakhchal suggests a single recognizable invention, but the surviving buildings reveal something more complicated. Across Iran, ice houses vary in size, shape, construction, water source, and method of operation. Some are enormous dome chambers visible from far across the plain. Others are elongated vaulted structures, partly buried and easy to overlook. Some stand beside unmistakable freezing pools and towering shade walls. Others appear to have received ice transported from mountains or colder districts. The shared purpose is clear, but the path to preserving cold changes with the landscape. This regional variation is not a flaw in the system. It is the system's greatest strength. A rigid design would fail across a country of high mountains, central deserts, coastal lowlands, windy plains, and cities supplied by very different water networks. Persian builders do not repeat one form blindly. They adjust proportions and methods to the conditions immediately around them. In the central plateau, where summers are dry and winters can bring sharp nighttime frost, the classic conical Yakhchal is especially well suited. Its deep circular pit and thick earthen dome provide thermal stability, while a nearby east-west wall shades shallow freezing basins. Towns such as Kerman and settlements across Yazd province preserve some of the most visually striking examples. These structures belong to landscapes where timber is limited, earth is abundant, and clear winter skies make nighttime cooling effective. Even among these domed ice houses, differences are substantial. One dome may cover a broad pit intended for a large urban population. Another may serve a smaller estate or caravan station. Wall thickness changes according to local heat and available labour. Entrances may face north, east, or another direction chosen to avoid direct sun and prevailing warm winds. Some domes are sharply pointed, while others rise more gradually. Their outer surfaces may include stepped layers, reinforcing bands, or repairs added over generations. In colder regions, the production of ice can be more straightforward. Water in shallow pools freezes reliably during winter nights, sometimes without the elaborate combination of evaporation and radiative cooling required farther south. Builders still use shade walls to protect the surface from daytime warming, but the climate provides a wider margin of success. Ice can form thicker and more frequently, reducing the number of nights needed to fill the chamber. Mountainous districts face a different set of opportunities. Here, natural snow may be abundant enough that local production pools are unnecessary. Workers gather snow from high slopes, shaded ravines, or areas where drifts accumulate deeply. It is packed, loaded onto animals, and carried down toward storage sites. In such places, the icehouse functions mainly as a receiving and preserving chamber. Its architecture may emphasize access routes and storage volume rather than large external basins. Transported snow has advantages. A mountain can supply far more frozen material than a shallow artificial pool produces in a single night. Dense snow, when compressed, can become a solid mass that survives well underground. Yet transport is costly. It requires animals, laborers, passable roads, and cold enough conditions to limit melting during the journey. Sudden weather changes or blocked mountain routes can interrupt the supply. A town relying entirely on upland snow is therefore vulnerable to distance and winter conditions. Some communities combine both approaches. Locally formed ice creates a dependable base supply, while mountain snow supplements it during particularly cold or productive seasons. The mixture may be stored in separate sections or compressed together. This flexibility allows the keepers to respond to changing weather rather than depending on a single source. Water supply introduces another layer of variation. A Yakhchal beside a Qanat has access to water that has travelled underground, protected from sunlight and evaporation. Qanat water often emerges cooler than exposed surface water, giving the freezing process a useful starting advantage. It can be released into basins in carefully controlled amounts, then redirected toward gardens, fields, reservoirs, or domestic use. The icehouse becomes one station within a larger hydraulic system rather than an isolated building. Where no Qanat is available, builders may depend on springs, wells, canals, winter streams, or stored water from cisterns. Each source imposes limits. Well water may need to be lifted by human or animal power. Seasonal channels may carry mud and debris. Cistern water is already valuable and cannot be wasted. The choice to divert water toward ice production must therefore fit local agricultural schedules and rights of distribution. In some larger complexes, the channels themselves are carefully arranged to cool the water before it reaches the basin. A narrow shaded flow loses heat more quickly than a deep exposed one. Water may pass beneath walls or through underground sections, arriving after sunset at a lower temperature. The evidence for such refinements varies from site to site, and later damage often makes the original route difficult to reconstruct. Still, the close relationship between ice houses and water networks is unmistakable. Wind also changes the design. In many parts of Iran, traditional buildings use wind catchers to direct air into rooms, cisterns, and underground spaces. Not every Yakhchal includes a wind catcher, and strong airflow inside an ice chamber can increase heat exchange if poorly controlled. Yet moving dry air can improve evaporative cooling around freezing pools, and carefully positioned vents can release warmer air gathering near the top of a dome. The challenge is to use wind during production without allowing it to become an enemy during summer storage. Coastal or more humid regions present greater difficulty. Evaporation slows when the air already holds substantial moisture, and winter nights may remain too mild for dependable local freezing. In such places, ice is more likely to arrive from higher elevations or colder inland areas. Storage chambers may still preserve it effectively once delivered, but the dramatic image of water freezing beside the dome does not apply everywhere. This is one reason Broad claims that all Persian ice houses manufactured their own ice should be treated cautiously. The form of the storage space also differs. Circular pits work efficiently beneath conical domes, but rectangular or vaulted chambers can be easier to divide into sections. Some elongated ice houses use thick parallel walls and arched roofs, resembling large subterranean halls. Compartments allow different batches to be stored separately, possibly according to quality, ownership, or intended use. They also let workers open one area without exposing the entire supply. Urban and rural settings create further distinctions. A city Yakhchal must support frequent removal, commercial distribution, and a larger workforce. Its entrance may connect directly with a road or market route. A rural ice house serving an estate may open only for household needs, harvest celebrations, or agricultural work. Caravanserais and roadside settlements may preserve ice primarily for travellers, animals, and merchants crossing long stretches of exposed land. Construction materials remain locally grounded. Mud brick dominates where clay-rich soil is available, but stone can reinforce foundations in rocky regions. Lime plaster may be used where moisture is a greater threat. Reed, straw, animal hair, ash, and other additives reflect the resources of nearby farms and workshops. There is no universal recipe because vernacular architecture is never separated from local ecology. This variety explains why one surviving structure cannot stand for the entire tradition. A beautifully restored dome may show how ice was stored but not how it was produced. A remaining shade wall may prove the presence of a freezing basin whose surface has vanished. A chamber beside a mountain route may have received snow rather than locally made ice. Scholars still debate the original operation of many individual sites, especially where later rebuilding has blurred the evidence. What unites them is not appearance, but strategy. Each Yakhchal gathers cold from whatever source the region offers and protects it through depth, mass, shade, drainage, and restricted access. The design changes because the climate changes. The method survives because it refuses to depend on a single form. That adaptability also makes the tradition vulnerable to misunderstanding. Modern descriptions often turn the most impressive examples into evidence of one ancient super-technology, stripping away regional limits, seasonal failures, and centuries of gradual improvement. To understand what the Persian ice houses truly achieved, it becomes necessary to separate their remarkable engineering from the myths that have gathered around them. The Yakhchal is remarkable enough without exaggeration, yet modern retellings often make it more mysterious than the evidence allows. Photographs of immense earthen domes rise and fall across the internet, accompanied by confident claims that Persians invented mechanical refrigeration thousands of years ago, that every ice house dates back to the Achaemenid Empire, that the chambers remained permanently below freezing, or that they manufactured vast quantities of ice in the middle of summer. These stories are appealing because they turn a sophisticated but understandable technology into something almost supernatural. They also obscure the real achievement, which depended not on lost science, but on exact knowledge of season, material, climate, and limitation. One of the most repeated claims assigns the Yakhchal a single invention date, often around 400 BCE. That date is frequently presented as though a surviving blueprint or royal inscription records the opening of the first Persian ice house. No such clear moment is known. Ancient Persians certainly used snow and ice, and large-scale cooling traditions may have deep roots. But the architectural history is difficult to reconstruct. Earthen buildings are repeatedly repaired, rebuilt, enlarged, and abandoned. A structure standing today may preserve older techniques while its visible form belongs mainly to the medieval or early modern period. This does not mean the tradition is recent or insignificant. It means that technologies can be ancient without every surviving example being equally old. The earlier stages may have involved simple snow pits, shaded cellars, and underground stores that left little archaeological trace. The great conical domes represent a mature architectural solution developed through long experience. Assigning all of them to a single ancient century compresses that gradual history into a cleaner story than the evidence supports. Another common misconception is that a Yakhchal functions like a modern refrigerator. A refrigerator actively removes heat from an enclosed space through a continuous mechanical cycle. The Yakhchal does not. It cannot take warm food placed inside during July and reliably freeze it through its own power. It stores a large mass of ice created or collected during winter and slows its melting through insulation, depth, shade, and careful access. The difference is fundamental. One system manufactures cold continuously by consuming energy. The other preserves cold already acquired from the environment. Calling the Yakhchal an ancient refrigerator is useful as a quick comparison, but taken literally it produces false expectations. The chamber's temperature may rise above freezing in parts of the building. The ice can still survive because melting requires additional energy, and because the protected core remains colder than the surrounding air. The structure does not need to hold the entire interior at a constant modern refrigeration temperature. It needs only to limit heat transfer enough that the frozen mass disappears slowly. The claim that ice was made during hot summer days is similarly misleading. The dramatic image of snow appearing beneath a blazing sun gives the technology much of its modern fame, but production generally occurs during the cold season. Summer is when the stored ice is used. The freezing pools exploit cold winter nights, and their success depends heavily on local temperature. Radiative cooling and evaporation can push a shallow water surface below the temperature of the surrounding air. But they do not eliminate climatic limits. A mildly cool night may produce frost or thin ice under ideal conditions. It does not guarantee an industrial harvest in warm weather. Some descriptions go further and suggest that water freezes beside every Yakhchal even when air temperatures remain far above zero. Laboratory demonstrations and modern radiative cooling systems show that exposed surfaces can indeed become significantly colder than ambient air. But historic performance varies. Humidity, cloud cover, wind, basin construction, water depth, elevation, and the duration of the night all matter in many Iranian interior regions. Winter temperatures naturally fall below freezing, so the basin does not require an extraordinary physical effect. The cleverness lies in enhancing and organizing cold conditions, not in overriding them. The famous long wall is also sometimes described as though its shadow alone creates ice. In reality, shade prevents the basin and ground from warming under daytime sunlight. It helps the water begin the night at a lower temperature. Actual freezing then depends on the night air, evaporation, radiation toward the sky, and the water's shallow depth. The wall is essential in some complexes, but it is one part of a larger process. Wind catchers provide another source of confusion. Persian architecture is celebrated for towers that direct airflow into houses, cisterns, and underground chambers. Because wind catchers and yakhchals belong to the same broad tradition of climate-responsive design, illustrations sometimes combine them automatically. Certain ice storage complexes may use vents or airflow strategically, but not every yakhchal has or needs a classic wind catcher. Uncontrolled warm air entering a summer ice chamber would accelerate melting. Air movement is beneficial only under the right conditions and at the right stage of operation. Materials attract their own mythology. Accounts sometimes describe a legendary mortar so perfectly insulating and waterproof that heat could scarcely cross it. Traditional mixtures could indeed be highly effective. Clay, lime, sand, ash, straw, animal hair, and other ingredients may improve strength, reduce cracking, and resist moisture. But the walls do not possess impossible thermal properties. Their effectiveness comes largely from enormous thickness, trapped air, careful maintenance, and the slow conductivity of earthen construction. The recipe matters, but geometry and mass matter just as much. The surviving domes themselves can create the illusion of permanence. They appear monumental, almost geological, yet they require repeated repair. Rain erodes them, heat opens cracks, neglect weakens plaster and allows water to enter. Many ice houses disappeared because earthen architecture rapidly deteriorates once maintenance ends. The structures that remain are not proof that the material lasts forever. They are the survivors of restoration, unusually dry conditions, or long periods of community attention. Food storage is another area where modern comparisons can go too far. A yakhchal can cool drinks, support frozen desserts, delay spoilage, and preserve certain foods for limited periods. It is not necessarily a sanitary communal refrigerator filled with meat and dairy products arranged on shelves. The chamber contains straw, earth, meltwater, workers, dust, and uneven temperatures. Some ice may be clean enough for consumption, while other ice is better used around containers. Practices vary, and later descriptions may reflect improved or localized methods, rather than a universal standard. Popular stories also tend to remove failure from the system. They describe every winter as productive and every summer as supplied. In reality, a warm or cloudy winter could reduce ice formation, a damaged water channel could halt production, a cracked dome, blocked drain, careless keeper, or unusually long hot season could destroy much of the store. Transported mountain snow might not arrive. Political disorder could interrupt labor and maintenance. The technology is resilient, but never invulnerable. Acknowledging these limits does not diminish the builders. It restores the human scale of their achievement. The Yakhchal succeeds without needing to be a miracle. Its creators understand that cold surfaces radiate heat into clear skies, even if they do not describe the process in modern equations. They know that thick earth delays temperature change, that shallow water freezes before deep water, that meltwater must drain away, and that a massive block survives longer than scattered fragments. They combine these observations into a system that works repeatedly enough to support towns, markets, kitchens, and social customs. Scholars still debate the age and operation of particular sites, and no single explanation fully accounts for the entire tradition. That uncertainty should remain visible. It is more honest to describe a diverse technology evolving across centuries than to claim one flawless ancient invention. The deeper story is not that forgotten engineers possessed powers modern people cannot explain. It is that ordinary materials, used with extraordinary care, allowed them to achieve something modern observers too easily mistake for magic. By the time mechanical refrigeration arrives, The Yakhchal has already solved its problem for generations. Its eventual disappearance will not prove that it was ineffective. It will reveal how quickly even a successful environmental tradition can be abandoned when a new machine promises cold without seasons, winter labor, or dependence on the sky. The end of the Yakhchal does not arrive in a single dramatic moment. There is no final winter when every freezing basin stands empty and every keeper locks the door for the last time. The disappearance happens unevenly, one town, one neighborhood, and one household at a time. A new source of cold enters the city, first expensive and unreliable, then increasingly ordinary. The ancient system continues beside it for years, sometimes decades, until the balance of labor, cost, convenience, and expectation shifts beyond recovery. Mechanical refrigeration changes the oldest rule governing Persian ice. Cold no longer has to be gathered in winter. It can be produced on demand. An ice factory can operate through warm weather, creating standardized blocks without waiting for clear skies, frost, mountain snow, or a sequence of perfect nights. The machine does not care whether clouds gather above the freezing pool. It does not depend on a qanat delivering exactly the right layer of water before sunset, as long as fuel, water, maintenance, and functioning equipment are available. Summer itself can become the season of production. At first, this new cold is not automatically superior in every respect. Imported machinery is expensive. Skilled operators and replacement parts are difficult to obtain. Engines break down. Fuel supplies fluctuate. Early industrial ice may remain concentrated in major cities, ports, military centers, railway stations, hospitals, and wealthy districts. A well-maintained Yakhchal in a smaller town can still perform its familiar work without imported components or continuous power. Its earth walls are local. Its workforce understands the system. Its winter water may cost less than machinery. For a time, the old and new technologies exist together. Factories supply urban customers while traditional ice houses serve outlying neighborhoods and rural settlements. Some merchants trade in both natural and manufactured ice. A block from a factory may be cleaner, more regular, and easier to measure, while Yakhchal ice may be cheaper or more accessible where transport networks remain weak. The transition is therefore not simply a story of advanced machines instantly replacing primitive buildings. It is a long competition between two infrastructures, each with advantages and vulnerabilities. The machine's greatest advantage is predictability. A keeper of a traditional ice house enters winter without knowing exactly how much cold the season will provide. A run of warm nights can leave the chamber half filled. A freezing pool may fail because of damaged channels or poor water supply. Mountain transport may be interrupted by snowstorms or conflict. Mechanical production reduces this uncertainty. Customers can purchase ice without asking how severe the previous winter was. Uniformity also matters. Factory ice can be produced in blocks of consistent size and shape, easier to stack, weigh, transport, and sell. Cleaner water and more controlled handling can make it more suitable for direct use in drinks, though actual sanitation depends on the factory and distribution system. Traditional ice, by contrast, may contain dust, straw, sediment, or other debris gathered during freezing and storage. As public health ideas change and urban consumers become more concerned with contamination, industrial ice gains another powerful advantage. Transport networks expand its reach. Railways, motor vehicles, and improved roads allow ice to move rapidly from factories to markets, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, and households. A Yakhchal serves an area limited by melting time and carrying distance. A truck can begin with larger quantities, travel faster, and follow a regular delivery route. The old geography of cold, once centered on each buried chamber, begins to dissolve. Kerosene-powered and absorption refrigerators introduce another stage of change. Cold no longer needs to arrive only as a melting block. It can be maintained inside a cabinet at the place where food and medicine are stored. These appliances remain expensive and unevenly distributed, but they alter expectations. A household refrigerator provides continuous access rather than a brief purchase that must be consumed quickly. Shops can keep perishable goods longer. Clinics can protect medicines more reliably. Food storage becomes less dependent on daily delivery and seasonal planning. Electrical refrigeration accelerates the process wherever stable power networks spread. Domestic units, commercial cold rooms, and industrial plants separate cooling from the architecture of the landscape. Thick earthen walls, deep pits, and winter basins are no longer essential. Cold is generated inside metal equipment that can be installed almost anywhere. The knowledge required changes as well. The ice keeper, basin worker, mud brick plasterer, and qanat manager give way to mechanics. Electricians, factory operators, and appliance vendors. This transformation brings real benefits. Food can be stored more safely and consistently. Medical supplies become easier to preserve. Urban populations gain dependable ice during long heat waves. Businesses can plan without fear that a mild winter will destroy the next summer's stock. It would be misleading to portray the decline of the Yakhchal only as a cultural tragedy. Many people embrace mechanical refrigeration because it improves convenience, hygiene, reliability, and choice. Yet the new system also creates different dependencies. A Yakhchal requires seasonal labor and maintenance, but little imported fuel once filled. A mechanical plant requires continuous energy, technical knowledge, spare parts, and centralized distribution. When power fails, the cold begins disappearing immediately. When fuel prices rise, production costs follow. The older system is constrained by weather. The newer one is constrained by infrastructure. During periods of political or economic disruption, traditional ice houses may briefly regain value, especially in places where machinery is unreliable. But the network of skills supporting them is already weakening. Once a freezing basin is abandoned for several winters, channels fill with sediment, walls erode, the dome cracks. Workers who understand the timing and handling of ice find other employment. Restarting the system becomes far more difficult than simply reopening a door. Urban growth hastens the decline. Land around historic Yakhchals becomes valuable for roads, housing, shops, and factories. Freezing pools occupy broad, shallow areas that appear wasteful in expanding towns. Shade walls obstruct new development. Qanat flows are redirected, depleted, or contaminated. A structure designed for the edge of a settlement may find itself surrounded by buildings, its access to winter sky and moving air reduced. Even an intact dome cannot function properly when the environmental system around it has been dismantled. Changing tastes contribute as well. Manufactured ice becomes associated with modernity, cleanliness, and progress. The Yakhchal, once a symbol of ingenious control over climate, may come to represent poverty or backwardness. Earthen architecture is neglected in favor of concrete and steel. Families who can afford refrigerators no longer wish to depend on a public ice cellar. The social prestige that once supported construction and charitable maintenance shifts toward electrical infrastructure and modern appliances. By the middle decades of the 20th century, many traditional ice houses are no longer economically competitive. Some remain in use in rural areas or survive as storage buildings, animal shelters, workshops, or abandoned shells. Others are demolished for their land or allowed to erode. Without annual plastering, small cracks become deep wounds. Rain enters, sections of dome collapse, the pit fills with debris. A building created through generations of maintenance can disappear within a few decades of neglect. The evidence remains incomplete because abandonment is rarely documented with the same care as construction. A town may remember roughly when its last icekeeper worked, but not the final quantity harvested or the precise year the basin stopped freezing. Oral histories preserve fragments, children descending into the cool chamber, vendors carrying blocks through summer streets, elders recalling ice mixed with syrup. These memories often outlive the working structures themselves. The disappearance of the Yakhchal is therefore not proof that its builders failed. The system succeeds for centuries because it fits a particular relationship between settlement, labour, climate, and seasonal expectation. It declines when that relationship changes. Machines offer a form of cold that is cleaner, more regular, less seasonal, and easier to commercialize at expanding urban scale. But the old ice houses do not vanish completely. Their domes remain on the horizon after the basins dry and the keepers leave. Stripped of their original purpose, they become ruins, landmarks, warehouses of memory, and physical evidence of a time when an entire community had to prepare for summer while winter still held the land. Long after the last winter harvest, the dome still stands. Its freezing basin may have vanished beneath a road. Its water channel may be buried under houses, and its entrance may be blocked by rubble. But the great earthen shell remains visible against the plain. From a distance, it can look almost untouched. A smooth cone rising from the same soil that supplied its bricks. Closer inspection tells a different story. Rain has cut narrow grooves down the plaster. Cracks widen near the base. Birds enter through holes once used for ventilation. The pit below is filled with dust, broken masonry, discarded objects, and sometimes decades of wind-blown sand. These abandoned structures are more than picturesque ruins. They are incomplete machines. To understand how they once worked, archaeologists, architects, conservators, and local historians must reconstruct a vanished system from the fragments that remain. The dome alone is not enough. Investigators search for the line of a shade wall, the shallow depression of a freezing pool, a blocked drainage channel, traces of a qanat, worn steps, door sockets, plaster layers, and repairs made during different periods. Every feature helps reveal how winter water became summer ice. Entering a neglected Yakhchal can be dangerous. The passage descends into darkness over unstable steps. Loose bricks fall from the ceiling. The floor may conceal deep holes or collapsed drains. Yet the change in atmosphere is immediate. Even when no ice has been stored for generations, the chamber often feels cooler and quieter than the exposed landscape outside. Thick walls still slow the day's heat. The earth still moderates temperature. The ruin continues to demonstrate part of its original logic simply by existing. At the bottom, the scale becomes clearer. The dome that appeared large from outside encloses a volume far greater than expected, because much of the structure lies below ground. The walls rise around a pit capable of holding an enormous mass of ice. Marks in the plaster may indicate former working levels or platforms. Niches may have held lamps, tools, or wooden supports. A narrow opening near the floor may lead toward the drainage system. Even small details preserve traces of labor that written sources rarely describe. The drain is especially revealing. In many ruins, it is clogged or nearly invisible. Yet its position confirms that melting was anticipated and managed. A channel may slope away from the center toward a sump or outlet beyond the wall. Sediment inside can sometimes show repeated water flow. Without this feature, the chamber would have become a basin of cold water rather than a durable ice store. Its presence reminds investigators that the Yakhchal was never intended to eliminate melting. It was built to control it. Plaster layers tell another story. A wall may carry several coatings, each applied after earlier surfaces cracked or eroded. Differences in texture and composition reveal cycles of repair. One layer may contain more straw, another more lime or ash. A later patch may use modern cement, added by residents attempting to prevent collapse. These repairs complicate dating, but they also demonstrate that the building's life was continuous. The Yakhchal was not completed once and left unchanged. It survived because generation after generation renewed its skin. Outside the dome, the landscape often holds the most fragile evidence. Freezing pools were shallow and broad, making them easy to erase when land was converted to fields, streets, or construction sites. Shade walls could be dismantled for bricks. Channels were redirected. A surviving dome without these features can create the false impression that ice was produced entirely underground. Careful survey may reveal faint foundations or changes in soil color marking where the wider complex once stood. Old photographs and local memories become valuable when physical traces are gone. An elderly resident may remember a long wall demolished during road expansion. Another may recall water entering the basin from a particular direction. Families may remember the last keeper, the price of ice, or the season when the chamber was finally abandoned. Such testimony must be treated cautiously, because memories change and stories become simplified. Still, when oral accounts align with surviving foundations, they can restore parts of the system that archaeology alone cannot recover. Restoration brings its own problems. An earthen dome requires intervention if it is to survive, but repairing it with incompatible materials can cause further damage. Hard cement plaster may trap moisture behind the surface, leading softer mud brick to decay unseen. Reconstructing a missing wall without secure evidence can create a convincing but inaccurate version of the past. Conservators must decide whether to stabilize the ruin as it stands, return it to a known historic form, or rebuild enough of the complex to demonstrate its operation. Some restored Yakhchals now serve as museums, cultural centers, storage spaces, or landmarks. Their interiors are cleared, entrances reinforced, and outer plaster renewed. Visitors descend into chambers that once held winter ice and experience the sudden reduction in temperature for themselves. Models and reconstructed basins can show how shade, shallow water, and underground storage work together. When restoration is careful, the building becomes an educational instrument without pretending that every missing detail is known. Other ice houses remain neglected. They stand beyond towns where development has shifted elsewhere, slowly losing material after each storm. Some are used as animal shelters or dumping places. Others have collapsed entirely, leaving only a circular depression and a mound of earth. Because mud brick returns so easily to the landscape, the disappearance can be almost complete. A structure large enough to serve an entire community may vanish until only local place names suggest what once stood there. The evidence remains incomplete, particularly for ordinary working routines. A surviving chamber can reveal volume and construction, but not the voices of the labourers who filled it. The wear on a step suggests repeated movement, yet it cannot identify who carried the ice. A blocked doorway may show later alteration, but not whether access was restricted by price, status, or custom. Archaeology reconstructs the system more easily than the society around it. Still, the ruins offer clues. A very large store near a market suggests broad distribution. A smaller structure beside an estate may indicate private use. Multiple entrances can imply different stages of loading and removal. Nearby caravan facilities suggest service to travellers. Connections with gardens, cisterns, or charitable buildings reveal how ice fitted into wider networks of water, hospitality, and patronage. Standing inside a restored chamber, it is tempting to focus on the dome's mathematical elegance. Yet the true monument includes everything no longer visible: workers breaking ice before sunrise, keepers checking meltwater, plasterers repairing cracks, carriers hurrying into town, and customers waiting in summer heat. The building is only the hardened shell of a seasonal community effort. Above the ruin, the modern world continues. Electrical lines cross the horizon, refrigerated trucks pass nearby. Houses contain appliances capable of producing ice with the push of a button. The old dome no longer serves the function that gave it life, but it still holds a kind of cold, the memory of winters gathered, summers postponed, and environmental knowledge built directly into the earth. That surviving knowledge may prove more than historical. As modern societies confront rising temperatures and increasing energy demands, the abandoned ice houses begin to look less like obsolete curiosities and more like carefully preserved arguments about how architecture can work with climate rather than against it. The ruined Yakhchals now stand in a world that once again struggles with heat. Cities across Iran and far beyond depend on electrical cooling systems that consume enormous amounts of energy during the hottest hours, precisely when power networks face their greatest strain. Air conditioners push warm air outside, refrigeration units run continuously, and glass-covered buildings absorb solar heat that must then be removed mechanically. Against this modern landscape, the Persian ice house can appear to belong to an entirely different age. Yet its most important lesson is not that society should return to storing winter ice beneath clay domes. It is that buildings can be designed to require less energy before machines are asked to intervene. The Yakhchal begins with climate rather than equipment. Its builders study the sun's path, the movement of wind, the availability of water, the temperature of the ground, and the difference between day and night. They do not construct the same building everywhere, and then force every interior to behave identically. They adapt the form to local conditions. This principle, now called climate responsive or passive design, remains central to sustainable architecture, orientation, shade, thermal mass, controlled ventilation, underground spaces, reflective surfaces, and night cooling can all reduce the amount of mechanical energy needed to maintain comfort. Thermal mass is one of the clearest surviving lessons. Thick earthen walls absorb heat slowly and delay its movement into an interior space. In climates with large differences between daytime and nighttime temperatures, that delay allows a building to release accumulated warmth after sunset rather than transferring the full midday peak indoors. Modern concrete and masonry can provide similar effects when used carefully, though their production may carry higher environmental costs than local earth. The principle is not that all buildings should have walls several meters thick, but that material choice and thermal timing matter as much as insulation ratings alone. Shade offers an even simpler advantage. The long wall beside a freezing pool demonstrates that preventing heat gain is easier than removing heat after it enters. Roof overhangs, courtyards, arcades, screens, vegetation, and carefully positioned walls can protect surfaces from direct sunlight. Modern buildings often rely on dark glass and air conditioning, while leaving large facades exposed to intense solar radiation. The Yakhchal reverses that logic. It treats sunlight as a force to be managed before construction begins. Depth provides another form of stability. Underground and partially buried rooms experience smaller temperature changes than exposed structures. Earth-sheltered architecture can remain cooler during hot periods and warmer during cold ones, reducing the energy needed for both heating and cooling. Basements, sunken courtyards, subterranean storage rooms, and shaded lower levels do not reproduce the Yakhchal exactly. But they use the same understanding that the ground stores temperature more slowly than the air. Nighttime cooling may also regain importance as summers grow hotter. In dry climates where nights remain significantly cooler than days, buildings can release stored heat through controlled ventilation after sunset. Air is allowed to move through the structure when outdoor conditions are favorable. Then openings are closed during the hotter hours. The Yakhchal's freezing basins use the night more dramatically, exposing shallow water to cold air and the clear sky. Modern buildings can use the same daily cycle less visibly, cooling walls and interior spaces when nature offers lower temperature. Radiative cooling has become an area of renewed scientific interest. Engineers are developing surfaces that emit heat efficiently through atmospheric wavelengths, allowing them to cool below the surrounding air under suitable conditions. Advanced materials may one day assist refrigeration or reduce building temperatures without large energy inputs. The physics is modernly measured, but the underlying observation is ancient. A clear night sky can draw heat from an exposed surface. The Persian ice makers exploited this effect alongside evaporation and winter cold without needing to describe it mathematically. Water, however, complicates any attempt to copy the old system. Evaporative cooling works best in dry air, but it consumes a resource already scarce in arid regions. Historic Persian engineering treats water with extraordinary care because communities understand its limits intimately. Qanats reduce evaporation by carrying it underground. Basins use controlled shallow layers. Gardens direct flow through planned channels. A modern cooling design that saves electricity while wasting large quantities of water may simply exchange one environmental problem for another. The lesson of the Yakhchal is not to use water carelessly, but to coordinate cooling with the wider ecology of supply. The same caution applies to romantic claims about vernacular architecture. Traditional systems are not automatically sustainable under every modern condition. Historic towns support smaller populations, different patterns of consumption, and lower expectations of continuous indoor temperature control. A Yakhchal requires land for shade walls and freezing pools, seasonal labor, suitable winter weather, and regular maintenance. It cannot provide the medical cold chain, industrial refrigeration, or domestic convenience demanded by modern cities. No single ancient technique can replace contemporary infrastructure. Its value lies instead in reducing unnecessary dependence. A building that remains tolerable through shade and thermal mass needs less air conditioning. A cold storage facility designed partly underground may require less energy to maintain temperature. Public spaces arranged around vegetation, Water used responsibly, and protected courtyards can offer relief during heat waves. Traditional materials can sometimes reduce embodied energy and support local repair skills. Mechanical systems remain essential, but they do not need to perform every task alone. There is also a social lesson hidden inside the ice house. The Yakhchal works because an entire community thinks across seasons. Water managers, builders, labourers, patrons, keepers, and carriers contribute at different moments. Winter work supports summer survival. Maintenance occurs before failure. Benefits depend on shared infrastructure rather than individual machines operating behind thousands of separate walls. Modern cooling has largely become private. Each house, shop, and vehicle creates its own pocket of controlled air. The energy demand is collective, but the response is fragmented. As extreme heat becomes more frequent, cities may once again need communal strategies. Shaded markets, cool public rooms, protected water stations, underground shelters, reflective streets, tree canopies, and neighborhood cooling centers can reduce risk for people who cannot afford continuous air conditioning. The Persian ice house does not provide a complete model for these spaces, yet it reminds us that climate adaptation has always been social as well as technical. Scholars still debate how much particular Yakhchals can directly inspire modern engineering. Their performance varies, and precise historical temperature data is rarely available. Some reconstructions may idealize systems that required more labor or lost more ice than later observers realize. The evidence remains incomplete. But their broader logic is difficult to dispute. They minimize exposure, exploit favorable conditions, store environmental advantage, and accept gradual loss rather than demand imperfect control. That final idea may be the most valuable. Modern engineering often treats comfort as a constant state that machinery must preserve regardless of season, hour, or location. The Yakhchal works with variation. It gathers cold when cold is abundant and releases it when heat makes cold valuable. It does not expect summer to disappear. It prepares for summer while winter still lasts. The great earthen dome therefore survives as more than a monument to preserved ice. It represents a particular way of thinking: observe first, build second, spend energy last. Beneath its rough surface lies an architecture of restraint, one that achieves extraordinary results not by overpowering the environment, but by noticing every advantage the environment briefly offers. The sun lowers over the plateau, and the dome casts a long shadow across ground where a freezing basin once reflected the winter stars. Nothing remains in that basin now. Dust has replaced water, weeds rise through cracks in the earth. The channel that once carried a thin, measured flow from a qanat has collapsed into silence, and the people who knew exactly when to release that water, when to break the ice, and when to seal the chamber are gone. Yet the shape of their knowledge remains. It remains in the thickness of a wall that refuses the speed of noon. It remains in a doorway turned away from the sun, in a drain built for melting that could never be entirely prevented, and in a pit descending toward the steady temperature of the earth. It remains in the understanding that survival is not always a matter of defeating change. Sometimes it is a matter of delaying it, redirecting it, and preserving one season inside another. Winter came to Persia briefly. Frost silvered the ground, water hardened beneath the clear sky, and workers moved through darkness while the settlement slept. They gathered those fragile nights piece by piece and lowered them into the earth. Months later, when the roads shimmered and the air seemed emptied of moisture, that vanished. Winter returned in a cup, against a fevered forehead, or in the cool sweetness of a summer dessert. The ice itself never lasted. Even within the deepest chamber, it softened, cracked, and became water again. The Yakhchal did not promise permanence. Its achievement was measured in borrowed time. Perhaps that is why the ruined domes remain so haunting. Civilizations often leave monuments designed to proclaim conquest, wealth, or divine favor. These structures speak more quietly. They preserve the memory of preparation. They tell of communities that watched the sky, understood the ground beneath their feet, and built for a future season they knew would be difficult. As evening deepens, heat leaves the clay surface slowly. The first stars appear above the opening where warm air once escaped. Far below, the empty chamber holds only darkness and the cooler breath of the earth. For centuries, winter waited there while summer burned outside, and even now, with the ice long gone, the desert has not entirely reclaimed the cold.